What I learned crossing America on my Yamaha FZ6. I bought my Yamaha FZ6 a couple of years ago to get around Brooklyn. At the time, I had no clue that I would use it to travel the country to San Francisco. I just needed a commuter bike to get around the city, lane split my way around the BQE, and allow me to escape during the weekend to go upstate or anywhere I could find a twisty road. I bought it for slightly above $2,000 with pre-cracked fairings, smooth tires, and leaky fork seals. Perfect purchase, right? When my partner and I decided to move across the country, I didn't wait long before deciding that taking the bike was the best way to do so. Why would I want to pay $1,000 or more to ship my bike when I could take a fraction of that budget and have a great experience? In this video, I'd like to talk about what I learned crossing the US on my bike for the first time. Now keep in mind, I'm a newbie at this, so these are really my first impressions at long-term touring. So define a goal for the trip to give you pacing for the trip. So before I started planning the trip, I tried to clearly define what I wanted to do and set realistic expectations with myself. I knew that I wouldn't be able to stay in nice places and eat nice food given the time and the budget that I had. My main goal was to get to San Francisco in 12 days and see some nice roads along the way. I had a limited budget, so I stayed in cheap hotels, hostels, and camped a bit. However, I allowed myself flexibility when planning my route in order to catch some roads that I really wanted to check out. I did a detour south by the Ozarks in Arkansas and enjoyed some of the best roads that I've ever ridden down there. I also made sure to check out Pikes Peak, since I always wanted to check out this famous road on which the Pikes Peak hill climb took place. Keep off the interstate. The interstate is generally boring and was designed to bring people to where they needed to go as fast as possible. And really, that's the opposite of my goal. I want to see the country. I don't want to see a slab of concrete lined with similar looking gas stations and uninspired chain restaurants. I would much rather go through the middle of nowhere on a 2-lane road, because then the middle of nowhere becomes the middle of somewhere. You see small towns, farms, fields, and you see them much slower, which makes them places instead of names of exits. Where I messed up was planning my stops a little bit too much. This made it sometimes feel like I was rushing to get somewhere instead of just enjoying where I was. If I could go back, I would tell myself to plan a route, but not to plan the timing. A very rough timeline is useful, sure, but don't fall into the same trap I did when I booked all of my first 8 stops ahead of time. We live in an age where we have many apps dedicated to finding same-day bookings or campsites easily. Actually, I had to rebook and move all my reservations one day as I got delayed in Oregonia, Ohio. I was camping that day, and in my infinite knowledge, I decided to leave the campsite by a different route that I entered it from. This led me to get stuck in the mud, and I had to spend half a day pulling the bike out. In only an hour, I had rebooked everything. Technology is amazing, I know, but this taught me 2 important lessons. First, not to fear last-minute changes like this. And second, people are way nicer than you think, and it's okay to ask for help. I spent a couple of hours trying to pull my bike out on my own, only managing to move it 2 feet. And then I called one of the people that had shown me around the campsite the night before, and they connected me with one of their friends, and it turns out that he was the perfect person to help. Ex-paratrooper, he was strong enough to help and help me pull my bike out of the mud. And if he hadn't been there, this whole adventure would have been way more short-lived. And this video would really only have one tip: don't get stuck in the mud. So yeah, I think it's cliche to talk about people being one of the best parts of the experience, but it really is true. If only for the fact that America is big, and it can sometimes be kind of boring. If you're tempted to do this, just know that you have to be okay being bored. Sure, when you're tearing up a nice road with nice corners, you won't have the time to be bored. But between those roads, and for most of the middle part of the country, the roads are flat, straight, and the towns are pretty scarce. Before I left, I told a friend about my route, and he told me that Kansas was going to be brutal because it was going to be so straight and so repetitive. In his words, Why would you do that to yourself? But in a twisted way, I was looking forward to that stretch in Kansas. I knew that I had about 900 miles to cover in 2 days to go from one end of Kansas to the other, where I would hit Colorado and hit mountains. I wanted to see if I could just look at the road for 2 days and be okay sitting there with my own thoughts. And the truth is, when there's less to focus on, you notice the small things over and over. Some parts of the state have different pavement than others. The fields get drier and drier looking the closer you get to Colorado, and the soil seems to slowly change colors as you go. It was by far the most relaxing part of the trip. I also made the choice to avoid big cities, and I'm very happy I did. In the words of that famous movie, all cities are alike. And people would always open up when I was telling them that I was traveling from New York City, and that it was a one-way trip. It's like many people I met maybe made that same choice and chose the peace and quiet of small-town America. However, here I should mention that I at least did a quick Google search about the towns that I planned to stay in for the night. It's the sad reality that many towns suffered from the opiate epidemic. And as much as I wanted a cultural experience, I didn't want to wake up to my spark plugs missing. I got mostly lucky and found some really cool towns along the way. Oregonia in Ohio was great. I found a cool place to camp on Hip Camp and stayed on a piece of farmland that locals are trying to give a new life to. If you want, I'll have a link in the description for that. I also really enjoyed crossing Nevada using Highway 50. Most of the towns along the way are old mining towns turned to tourism. It was interesting to visit them and get a glimpse into what life may have been during the gold rush. They also give you a cool little booklet to get stamped at different spots throughout the route, and they mail you a certificate if you complete it. Since I'm a child at heart, of course I did it, and I received my piece of paper within a couple of weeks. Good memories. Maintenance. I do all my own maintenance, so I did basically all the items I could before I left. Fresh oil, coolant, new spark plugs. I changed one of my tires, made sure my chain was in good shape. The only mechanical failure I experienced was my rear shock, which lost all damping after I thought that it was smart to do some off-roading in Moab. So hints for the friends at home, the FZ6 is not the best bike for that, and you really gotta wash up that dust before it gets inside everything. Honestly, this wasn't a big issue. I rode a little bit more carefully until I got to my destination. Since we're on the topic of safety, I did keep people posted about where I was. I used my phone to share my location at all times, and I tried to check in pretty regularly with family and friends. A lot of America is pretty remote, and on some of these roads, I didn't see another vehicle for hours. I was very glad I brought clothing for all types of weather. I faced weather from 30 to 105. I wore a perforated jacket and riding jeans, and took with me a bunch of layers to add or remove depending on the weather. I had a windbreaker or waterproof top layer that I could add when it started to get chilly. I had a Base Pro Shop fleece that I added when I got to the mountains and it got much colder. And I had some compression base layers that I just threw on when I got to Pikes Peak. I also packed a cooling vest, which I didn't get a chance to use. It's kind of like a reverse umbrella. I'd much rather pack it and not need it than need it and not have it. It definitely got brutally warm at some points. So you have to remember, stay hydrated. I had a hydro pack on my back for most of the trip and had a couple of bottles of water with me at all times. I did the trip in the beginning of summer, and the Nevada stretch was so dry that I talked in a deep voice for a couple of days. I learned through Google that that's actually a real condition called Vegas throat. The air is so dry that people just talk in a deep voice like that. Also, I skipped lunch. Eating a big lunch slows you down and keeps you off the road for prime daylight hours. I would just eat a protein bar when I stopped for gas. I'd do that a couple of times throughout the day, and then I would have a bigger dinner. After doing this, I truly think that anyone with time and a working bike can do this. I'm just a regular guy with a bike. It's not even a touring bike or anything special. The US has great gas station coverage, good roads, and plenty of cheap motels and campsites. Depending on how tough your butt is, you could probably do it in a week and just take the interstate a bit more. Or you could stretch it to a month or more and enjoy the sights and take your time. People have been doing cross-country trips for a while now, since way before social media and always being connected were a thing. Being in this connected age made this trip easier, since it's simpler to plan on the fly or look up the reputation on a place online. But I would urge anyone doing this to try to keep their phone on silent and tune the notifications out. Allow yourself to be lonely on the road, as this will push you to go towards the other and talk to them. Asking the gas station clerk what they think of the town, asking the motorcyclist you just met if there's a great road around the corner. Our devices do their best to make us think that we're never alone, and that does us the disservice of making us more disconnected from others than ever. Anyway, thanks for watching, and go explore. My shit's slipping off.